It's a question that sounds so simple. What is school actually for? But man, the answers to that question spark some of the most intense debates out there. Today, we're going to jump right into the thick of it, exploring the big ideas that have shaped every single classroom you've ever been in. And we're going to start with an image of a teacher that might feel familiar. So, when you picture a great teacher, does your mind conjure up someone like this? Professor Kingsfield from the classic film The Paper Chase? He's brilliant, no doubt, witty, for sure, but also kind of terrifying, right? Using this relentless barrage of questions to corner his students. And what's wild is that this style of teaching, the Socratic method, is literally thousands of years old. But is that the only way to do it? Is it even the best way?
You know all those heated arguments we have today about standardized tests, social-emotional learning, which books belong in the library? None of this is new, not really. It's all just the latest round in what philosophers call an immortal conversation, a huge, ongoing debate about the whole point of education that started way back with the ancient Greeks and, well, it's clearly still going strong.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we've got to go back, way back, to the philosophical blueprints laid down in ancient Greece. Plato and Aristotle, these guys asked the big foundational questions that, in a lot of ways, we are still wrestling with today. Their ideas set the stage for everything that followed. So here is our first major philosophical showdown. On the one hand, you've got Plato. For him, it was all about order. He saw society as basically having three types of people, and the job of education was to be a kind of giant sorting hat, figuring out which box each kid belonged in to create a perfectly stable society. But then, fast forward a couple of millennia, and the American philosopher John Dewey comes along and says, hold on a minute, 3 categories? No way. Dewey argued that people are way too complex for that. For him, the whole point was flipped. You don't fit the child to the state, you fit the education to the individual child. Now, Plato's student, Aristotle, gave us another idea that is still incredibly powerful today: character education. His thinking was, you don't become a good person by reading a book about ethics. You become a good person by practicing being good. It's exactly like building a muscle. You get a kid in the habit of being honest, of being courageous. You do the reps. And only way later, once that good character is solid, can they really start to reason through complex moral problems. All right, let's hit the fast forward button, way forward, to a thinker who was a total game changer for the modern world, John Dewey. He looked back at those classical ideas from Greece and said, you know what? That's not going to cut it anymore. If we want a real democracy to thrive, we need a completely new way of thinking about school. One that's not about sorting people into boxes, but about teaching them how to think for themselves. So how did Dewey think we learn? Well, it wasn't by just sitting there and memorizing facts. Not at all. He said we learn by solving problems. For him, thinking is an active process. It starts when you feel a real problem, something that makes you curious or stuck. Then you come up with an idea, a hypothesis, and you try it out. You see what happens, and then you think about it. It's basically the scientific method, but for all of life. It's hands-on. This simple math example makes Dewey's big idea crystal clear. For him, knowledge isn't some abstract thing floating in the ether. It's simply what works. You test a rule. Does it give you the right answer? Great. That's knowledge. Does it fail? Well, then the rule is faulty, and you toss it out. You find truth by trying things out. It's a really practical, powerful way to think about learning. And this idea applied to every school subject. Dewey really hated it when school felt like what he called a hodgepodge of unrelated fragments. So geography, that's not about memorizing a list of rivers and capitals. No. As he says here, it should be the story of the earth as our home. Everything, history, science, you name it, had to connect back to the real, lived experiences of students. Okay, now let's jump into the 20th century, because this is where our immortal conversation takes a really interesting turn. The whole debate kind of splits into two powerful and often opposing teams. You can think of it as a big battle between the head and the heart. So in one corner, you've got the head camp. These are the analytic philosophers. They wanted to bring a kind of scientific precision to education. They focused on logic and language, asking questions like, what are the necessary conditions for something to be called teaching? Then, in the other corner, you have the heart camp with the ethic of care. And for them, teaching isn't some logical formula. It's fundamentally about human relationships, about connection, and about caring for the entire student.
Let's dig into the head approach for a minute. A philosopher named Israel Scheffler basically came up with a 3-point checklist. To call something teaching, he said, it had to meet these conditions. First, you have to intend for learning to happen. Second, your methods have to be reasonable. They have to actually make sense for the goal. And third, your manner has to respect the student's mind. You have to let them ask why. It's a really clean, rational, logical definition.
But then you get the reality of the classroom. Just take in this scene. It is chaotic. It's emotional. It's messy. And so the critics of that purely head approach would ask a pretty simple question. How much does that neat, logical definition of teaching actually help Mrs. Mitchell in this moment? What does she need right now? More logic or something else?
And that something else is exactly what the heart approach is all about. Philosophers of care say that a truly moral education is built on 4 key pillars. First is modeling. Teachers have to show students what it looks like to be a caring person. Second, dialogue. Having real conversations where you actually listen. Third is practice, giving students chances to be caring themselves. And finally, confirmation, which is about seeing the best in a student and affirming it, encouraging them to grow into that better self.
So, Plato, Dewey, head versus heart. Why does any of this philosophical stuff matter to us right here, right now? Well, because this exact tension, this tug of war between knowledge and relationships, between the head and the heart, is playing out in every single school, in every district, every day. It all brings us right back to that huge, fundamental question. After all this time, after all this brilliant thinking, what is the whole point of school? Your answer to that question places you somewhere on the map of this great debate. And this is what that map looks like today. On one side, you have the argument that the goal is knowledge. That leads to a focus on curriculum, on standards, and success being measured by test scores. That is the head approach in modern-day clothes. On the other side, the goal is relationships. That leads to a focus on the whole child, on their well-being, on social-emotional learning. And that's the legacy of the heart approach. This isn't just an abstract argument. It is the central tension defining education right now. And here's the real takeaway. Knowing about this immortal conversation isn't just for an academic paper. It gives you the tools, the language, the framework to look at the schools in your own community and ask better, more informed questions. It empowers you to actually participate in the debate about what kind of education we really want for our kids. So I'll leave you with one final question, one that gets right to the very core of this whole thing. When it all comes down to it, what do you think is more fundamental to a great education? What a student knows or who a student becomes?